Kajuro threw his hands up with a joyful cry. He hadn't had this much fun in a game for a long time. Seeing insults in the chat, he decided to look at the player's profile as a mummy. Naturally, based on the nickname in the game, he had no idea who it was, but he was obliged to write a couple of caustic words in response. Afterwards, he remembered how good the red voice was with new abilities, remembering the words of the clown that he does not know how to use the stones and only sells them. Kajuro thought about this. Putting his hand in his pocket, he began to look for stones. The red eye skills are strong, but if they can somehow be upgraded with the help of stones, it will be very useful. Having taken out the stones, he noticed that the red ones were starting to glow. Apparently, they were suitable for leveling up the skill. All that remained was to understand how to use them. Bringing them to his face, he felt the stones begin to turn into mana and penetrate his voice. Approaching the mirror, he looked at himself and saw that the red voice had become brighter and emitted a strong glow. Kajuro felt the power of the new skills, and the appearance of the eye became more terrifying for the enemy. Realizing this, he quickly wanted to test it in battle. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The hero was surprised because he was not expecting anyone. Different thoughts began to enter his head, from the worst to the banal distribution of invitations to establishments. A little afraid to walk up to the door and ask, "Who's there?" Kajuro stood there without making a sound. It was a warm summer day outside. School was over, so he had no idea who might be standing outside the door. Having collected himself from bad thoughts, he simply walked to the door and opened it. A bald old man stood on the threshold. This elderly man introduced himself as the director of one of the universities, where they would like to see Kajuro as a student. Kajuro, realizing that this is very good news, shakes hands with the director of the university and invites him to go into the room to discuss the conditions of study. The old man was quite calm and showed some trust and a desire to find out more about which university he represented. Suddenly, the director immediately hands over the admission form and offers to fill it out. Their university is prestigious and very large. The teachers are all qualified monster absorbers. Taking the form in surprise, Kajuro began to closely study what exactly this university was and what chances he had to achieve success there. The name of the university confused the guy a little, because he had never heard of it before. The university called FU Fell did not inspire much confidence in Kajuro, and he began to ask the director which famous graduates studied with him. How long has this university been around, and why hasn't he heard of it before? The director was a little perplexed, since he could scare off the guy with his weak group of graduates, and the fact that the university was very unpopular. The weakest people who had not entered anywhere usually ended up there. Trying to come up with strong words for the guy, the director mentioned that his studies were free, and the strongest teachers would teach him. To which Kajuro asked, "What are the names of those very strong ones?" "If so, then they are known," Kajuro said. Indignant at the guy's words, the director very emotionally began to demonstrate his skills, saying that he was one of such teachers. Having calmed down a little, the director began to encourage Kajuro to sign the admission paper, and he himself would provide decent conditions for studying with his own eyes. Standing in the doorway for some time now stood a charming lady with glasses and a pendant around her neck. She clearly did not pass by, but came to her destination. Introducing herself as the rector of one of the most famous universities in the country, she greeted Kajuro. Having said that it was sent by the Minister of Education himself, the director and Kazuro's mouths dropped open. They clearly didn't expect this. The director's chances of inviting the guy to his school were fading before his eyes. Coming closer, she, smiling, extended her hand to Kajuro and offered him a place at the best university in the city. Stretching out his hand in response, Kajuro turns his attention to her hand and notices the many monsters that were absorbed. She was clearly very strong and amazingly beautiful. Taking out from her purse an application form for admission to the University of the Supreme Devourers named after Mao Qi. All the cards were clearly against the director of the Fu Fel University. Having taken his form from Kajuro, he lowered his head and realized that there was nothing to choose here. Obviously, he has no chance against such an institution. The old man had already begun to leave. At that moment, the rector of a prestigious university rang. At this time, Kajuro studied her invitation and stood in bewilderment. The call was from the Minister of Education, probably to make sure that Kajuro accepted the conditions and agreed to enter their elite university. Suddenly, shouts were heard from the phone about a ban on Kazuro's admission. Everyone was surprised by this decision, especially Kajuro. The director, stopping in the aisle, began to listen and see a chance to take the boy for himself. Kajuro stood in bewilderment while the rector tried to talk to the minister. Her surprise at this statement was understandable, because she personally observed Kajuro during the exam and saw potential in him. Shouting on the phone yielded nothing, and all that was said was that the ban came from influential members of the university management. While she was trying to reason with the minister, Kajuro began to understand that the last fight was clearly involved. The girl he fought with looked like one of the strongest students of the Mao-Chi Supreme Devourer's institution. This means that she influenced this decision. After finishing the phone conversation, the rector said with great regret that the guy would not be able to study with them. This was an order from the Educational Council with the Minister of Education. Kazuro, understanding the essence of what was happening, showing dissatisfaction and awareness of who kidnapped him, stood looking at the table and sighed. The rector patted him on the shoulder and said that he was very talented, and his chances of becoming the strongest monster absorber were great. Unfortunately, the Minister of Education can influence all educational institutions, and one refusal may not be enough. There is no way he can get into the world of monsters alone, and he fights there. This right is only given at universities. The ban on this is very serious, and the punishment is very strict. Realizing the seriousness of what was happening, Kazuro began to suspect that he no longer had a chance to succeed. Such powerful people can destroy everything he is so eager to gain. The old man, standing in the passage and hearing the conversation, closes the door, thereby drawing attention to himself. By clapping his hands, he shows pleasure and the opportunity that has arisen. Handing back his admission form in an aggressive manner, he joyfully shouts that Kajuro can enter his university. Being a little-known Fu-Fel establishment, the minister will have little chance of influencing Kajuro's fate. Moreover, the director promises that nothing threatens him within the walls of their university. Kazuro, concerned about the lack of the right to enter the world of monsters, decided to clarify whether the director has such a right. Stroking his beard and grinning at the beautiful rector, the director claims that he is famous for his disregard for the Ministry of Education, and of course, he has the right to get into the world of monsters. Hearing such pleasant words, Kazuro was very happy that he could continue to improve his skills in battles and achieve success, even in such a little-known educational institution. Kazuro an admission form and asks him to sign it. Ego joy does not leave the face. The gait was as if he was dancing. The joyful couple discussed admission and the possibility of studying to influence the leveling of skills and their use in battles with monsters. The director, with a big smile, promised to help the boy in all matters. Telling how big the park was near their university and a great place to train, he encouraged Kajuro to sign in every possible way. There are large residential complexes and a market nearby. All amenities are within walking distance. Kajuro decides to sign the document. Considering that the Minister of Education can in every possible way interfere with his choice of where to enroll, you have to choose from what gives you at least a chance to become great. Having signed the document, the director thanked the guy and wished him a pleasant rest, because after the holidays, he will study at the most underrated educational institution. The director also suggested that the boy tell his family about his admission, so that they wouldn't worry that the guy wouldn't get in anywhere. Kajuro immediately agreed and began calling his parents. The director was glad that he had snatched such a talent from under the noses of the most prestigious universities in the country. The rector looked at them, realizing that something was not clean here. She looked at Kajuro and didn't understand why such a talent was rejected and forbidden to enroll. Maybe the boy had annoyed someone? After such a day, Kazuro wanted to take a walk around the city at night. The windows were lit up, there were a lot of people walking around, and everyone was having a good time. Passing by the monster seller, Kajuro noticed him. Such merchants can sell quite dangerous monsters with very rare abilities. Moving closer to look at the monster in the cage, Kajuro wanted to evaluate the monster and maybe even buy it. The monster looked like a golem from Kajuro's favorite movie. Saliva dripped from his mouth, torn clothes and bulging eyes did not show the monster to be strong. The cage was covered with special scrolls to block the monster's abilities, so that there was no threat to others. Looking at such a weak monster, he remembered how sellers deceive monsters. Without understanding the product themselves, they try to mark it up at 3 times the price. The seller kindly tried to trick Kajuro into buying a monster with weak abilities, passing them off as very strong. Realizing that the seller did not understand monsters, Kazuro tried to reduce the price to a ridiculous level, telling the seller that the monster was weak and not worth a penny. The seller, without showing his ignorance, simply offered such a reasonable client a good 10% discount on the purchase, and he would give the cage as a gift. Kazuro began to taunt them, showing his reluctance to pay more, and offered a 50% discount with a cage and a large pink stone to boot, showing your greedy gaze and starting to lick your lips. It looked like he wanted to devour them. Seeing this, the seller got scared and, hearing such a proposal, became pretty angry with the guy. The monster was also irritated by the humiliation he heard and expressed his dissatisfaction by shouting. Seeing the boy's gaze, the monster sensed his aura and became quite frightened. After all, the absorbed monsters of Kazuro strengthened the aura, thereby showing the monsters who was standing in front of them. Considering that after improving the Red Eye's skills it became a high level, then the guy already had 3 high-rank monsters. The seller, seeing how the guy intimidates the monster and scares away the customers, shouts for him to get out. Smiling at the humiliation of these scoundrels, Kajuro began to leave. Throwing his hands behind his head and whistling, the satisfied boy walked away in search of something interesting. The seller, clutching his chest, became very nervous with anger and sat down to rest. At the same time, Tsuyuki and her brother were walking around the market. After the exam, she could not forget Kajuro's humiliation and kept thinking about how to take revenge on him. Suddenly, anger creeps through her body as she sees a familiar silhouette in the distance. The outline was very similar to Kajuro, whom she hated greatly. Coming closer, she made sure it was him and began screaming in anger. Meanwhile, Kazuro examined the seller's goods and drove him crazy, paying attention to all sorts of little things. Tsuyuki told her brother Fen that this is the same guy who insulted her, and he needs to be taught a lesson. Fen looked at Kajuro with contempt and a desire to humiliate. While they were talking, Kazuro pestered the seller with low-quality stones. They did not shine brightly enough and were damaged, which means they had weak power. The price that the seller offered was too high. The red price for this was 40 yuan. The seller was very irritated and clutched his heart. They humiliated him and wanted to blame him for the poor quality of the goods. He pointed his finger at Kajuro, saying that he did not understand the product. Unsuspecting Kazuro, holding the stone in his fingers, feels like it is being torn out of his hand. Raising his head and eyes towards the stone, he notices a familiar face. It was Tsuyuki with some guy. They looked at Kazuro with a contemptuous look. Brother Fen held the stone in his hand, saying that he was not worthy of such a stone, and therefore was not able to buy it. Looking up, Kajuro was angry and wanted to teach the couple a lesson. Considering that Tsuyuki could influence admission to the university, they were quite famous and would not attack in front of strangers, so we must figure out how to humiliate them, Kazuro thought, holding out a card to pay for the purchase of a monster stone, thereby trying to humiliate Kazuro. The seller was glad to finally get rid of the stone and gladly accepted the payment. Tsuyuki stood behind with a slight grin, agreeing with her brother's words. Kazuro, hinting that the boy is stupid and buys broken stones for a lot of money, makes Fen doubt his choice. Looking at the stone, he became convinced that there were many cracks, and the monster's magical power could evaporate from the stone without leaving a trace. Trying not to embarrass himself and keep up the brand of a rich kid, Fen said that he didn't care about the stones, and he just helped the seller with the money. His family will not be poorer because of this. Hearing this, Kazuro had the idea to teach the rich a lesson. He started shouting to the whole market about rich clients buying broken stones. This made the brother and sister feel a little dazed. Their status and fame could be ruined by one awkward refusal or action. Hearing such a wonderful offer, most of the nearby sellers began to bring their broken stones with an offer to buy. Naturally, these scoundrels did not lower the price and tried to scam the client out of a tidy sum, realizing that now the entire market will flock to them. Fen and Tsuyuki tried to leave, but the sellers who were pursuing them were not far behind, and asked to look at their goods. Seeing such an influx of sellers, Kazuro decided that this was not enough, and began to shout and point with his finger that a buyer of broken stones had appeared. Going out to the middle of the market, he loudly began to talk and point to the sellers of broken stones, trying to draw attention to them and not let them go so easily. The salespeople standing nearby immediately began to look at potential clients and run to them. Brother and sister, in turn, were very angry at such actions of Kazuro and looked at him with a desire to punish the provocateur and rogue. Before they had time to come to their senses, the family was already surrounded by sellers with their offers to buy stones. More and more people came to look at the buyers of broken stones. The people surrounding them began to irritate Fen greatly. Too many questions and proposals were heard from all sides. The unbearable feeling of being surrounded by amateurs is brewed on the simpletons, but the family's fame does not allow them to set a bad example and lower their status. Taking the card out of his pocket, he agreed to buy the stones, and with great disappointment and anger began to hand the card to the seller. Having applied the card, the machine displayed a huge amount of 800,000 EUR. The salesman's grin was ear to ear with joy. Fen had never experienced such humiliation and setup. In return, he received a box of broken stones not worth a penny. Suyuki told Fen that they had never done such a big waste and her father obviously wouldn't like it. Fen stood there, biting his tongue. His state of humiliation and fear of getting away from his father was visible on his face. Clapping his hands, Kazuro looked at them and laughed loudly, saying that there had never been such clients on the market. They made a splash and monthly profits for sellers. "Their family has never been so generous," said Kazuro. Seeing Kazuro again, the incident hit Fen's self-esteem hard, and he decided to deal with the scoundrel. Suyuki, saying that Kazuro was to blame for everything, looked angrily without trying to stop her brother. Approaching Kajuro with great zeal for revenge, he began to offer to fight them in the arena. The guys standing behind watched as the senior student wanted to teach the guy a lesson. Kajuro didn't show any fear or apprehension. He just didn't want to fight. The children were surprised, and the boy was unlikely to agree to this kind of duel against a senior student from the most famous monster scavenger school. Kazuro scoffed that he wasn't going to take part in a fight just like that, but if Fen offered something significant, he would think about it. He won't attack Kajuro in front of all strangers and disgrace the honor of his family. Fen then decides to offer the stones that he bought through Kazuro's vein. Looking angrily at the guy, the sister and brother were already on the verge of losing their tempers and just didn't want to screw the guy over. Kazuro looked in surprise at the box of stones. There was a thought in my head that even if they were cracked, there might be some kind of power in them, especially for free. This amount of stones will completely replenish the supply and will be very useful. After thinking carefully, Kazuro agrees to duel in the arena with Fen. The arena was located near the bazaar and in the open air. A lot of people came to watch the duel between the two absorbers. Usually athletes fight here, but today is a special evening. Walking past the market, Hanami the clown heard a noise near the arena and came to look. Among the crowd of screaming people under the arena, she approached the arena and saw Kajuro there. She was delighted to see her opponent in the arena. Hoping that the enemy is very strong and will teach Kajuro a lesson would be very helpful. Removing the bandages from his hand, Fen looked at Kazuro and was determined to deal with the impudent scoundrel. Senior students were famous for their skills and frequent trips to the world of monsters, where they honed their skills. Kazuro had little chance against such a master. While Kajuro pretended that he was not in the mood for a serious battle and continued to joke, Fen, with his proud grin, was preparing to strike. As soon as the gong for the start of the fight rang, Kajuro immediately used a monster with a chainsaw to attack. With his behavior, he only tried to distract attention and show that he was weak. Summoning a monster with a chainsaw, he immediately began to run towards Fen to attack and end the battle with an easy victory. The monster's speed was high, as was its strength. Having barely dodged a chainsaw attack, Fen was surprised by the monster's power. The idea that Kazuro deliberately wanted to lower the guy's vigilance was already obvious. Having managed to jump away from the chainsaw attack, Fen begins to activate his monsters for battle. Rolling up his sleeve, he revealed that he also had 3 monsters, just like Kajuro. Standing in a fighting stance, he summoned 2 of his monsters, a swamp and an electric one. These were quite dangerous creatures. Their power exceeded that of a chainsaw. Hanami, who was watching what was happening, looked thoughtfully at the duel. She began to worry that Kajuro might be killed, and she would not be able to take revenge on him herself. Noticing a thoughtful girl nearby, the man next to him said that she reminded him of someone. Confused that she might be found out, she said she had been filming a food commercial on TV. in order to divert suspicion from the criminal world. Fen orders the swamp monster to attack Kojuro using dive magic. The power of such a monster was capable of inducing a prolonged stun on the enemy from which it was impossible to escape. The magic of immersion meant that the sensation became as if the opponent was underwater and could not breathe. Movement was also constrained, and it was easy prey. Kojuro didn't expect this, but he didn't plan on being strangled either. Being in a state of immersion, he tried to calm down and hold his breath as long as possible. Trying to figure out how to get out of the camp and win the fight, he tried to focus on his breathing. Fen stood opposite and watched Kojuro suffer. He thought that it would be an easy victory and there was no reason to worry. Self-confidence was high, and training in the world of monsters was not in vain. Pointing his index finger at Fen, Kojuro directs the monster with a chainsaw to deal with the enemy, thus hoping to free himself. Being distracted by Kojuro, Fen, out of the corner of his eye, notices how a monster with a chainsaw is trying to attack him, and swinging its chainsaw, is ready to cut the guy. At the last moment, he manages to summon his third monster for protection. Confident in his defense, Fen realizes with a slight grin that Kojuro's attack failed, and now he definitely has no chance of winning. Having dug into the body of a huge and slippery monster, the saw could not cut the body. The monster was like a huge pile of dirt that could control the density of its body. Fen looked at Kojuro's futile attempts to defeat and damage his monster. This look spoke of complete control of the situation and extensive experience in battles. While Kojuro was fighting the water trap and was focused on survival, he closed his eyes and remained calm. Fen decides to end the fight with a lot of fun. He orders another monster to attack Kojuro. Full of confidence and the desire to teach the guy a lesson, he spares no effort in attacking. The electric monster begins to summon a bolt of lightning to strike the target. Opening his eye, feeling something not good, Kojuro tries to gather his strength. You can see the image of an approaching lightning strike in your eyes. Having managed to jump away in a water trap, Kojuro saves his life for now, but with the lack of air, it won't last long. Kojuro notices that the monster with the chainsaw is losing its power against a monster of a higher rank and is beginning to lose ground. Trying to somehow help, he activates the passive saw skill. This skill allows you to attack a monster of any rank twice as strong, but for a very short time. This should work and give you a chance to win. Enraged, the chainsaw-wielding monster begins to attack the mud monster. He was fierce, and the thirst for blood awoke in him, and his eyes shone even brighter. The feeling that the saw began to spin twice as fast and became sharper. The mud monster began to feel severe pain and scream. There was fear in the eyes. The incredible power of the chainsaw began to break through the monster's defenses and cut him. Fen, standing behind, saw how the saw began to cut through his monster. The monster's durability and likelihood of death began to increase. Trying to escape, and realizing that his plan for an easy victory is already in doubt, Fen orders the electric monster to attack Kojuro with rapid lightning attacks. Accumulating its power, the electric monster began to attack the guy. Turning away from the discharges, Kojuro tries with all his might to survive and wait for the right moment to attack. Making incredible somersaults and bounces from lightning, people around the arena rejoice at what they see. Such an exciting fight will not leave anyone indifferent. Fen begins to get nervous and asks the electric monster to strike with lightning more often and finally finish off the guy. Fenny really didn't like this situation in the battle, that some boy who had just graduated from school could dodge lightning bolts like that and could even harm his highest-ranking monsters. Breaking through a huge number of discharges, Kojuro tries to get to Fen and attack him. The power of the water immersion camp had already subsided, and it was possible to operate at full strength. Showing their incredible healing reaction, the crowd cheers and begins to support the guy. He received such opportunities from absorbing a red eye and pumping it up with stones, brought it to perfection. The crowd rejoices at what they see. Even Hanami begins to support Kojuro by shouting forest words at him. The man behind was a little embarrassed and looked a lot like the chairman of the board of absorbers. So it was. He was passing by when he heard a noise and decided to see what was happening there. He didn't feel very good from the surrounding noise of the battle and the screams of people, but he continued to watch. Qi's Supreme Devourer's school, Fen, and the new talent from the A-rank exam, Kojuro. Looking at the skills of the young talent, he did not understand why he was denied entry Kojuro to their university. Deciding that Kojuro was too inexperienced against an older student with more experience and skills, the head of the board came to the conclusion that he would lose. The class gap is too big for such a battle. Hanami heard the man's words and thought. She said that he doesn't know well what Kojuro is capable of, and there's no point in drawing premature conclusions. To which the man was quite surprised. For his work as the head of the board, he could always determine the winner in advance based on his skills and experience. He laughed at the girl's words and said that he was not mistaken in his decision. He had seen too many battles to be unsure. Hanami looked at him with a grin, knowing what Kazuro was capable of. Continuing to support Kojuro, she hoped that he would win, and they would fight on equal terms with her. Muskina looked at the girl, thinking that she was simply carried away by the boy and was not thinking sensibly. Meanwhile, in the arena, Kazuro, having dodged all the attacks of the electric monster, was already close to Fen and could attack him. Fen, being a little confused that everything is not going according to plan, orders the swamp monster to cast a binding spell and quickly. Kojuro was already running up to him and was ready to strike. Suddenly, Kazuro notices a large amount of green algae reaching towards him. If he doesn't have time to attack Fen, then it's all over. The swamp monster's magic was quite strong, and the amount of algae was innumerable. The ability to both stun and bind together was imba. He looked, realizing that such a monster would catch him now, and he had to urgently come up with a plan. Determined, he ran towards Fen to attack. Having reached him, Kazuro grabs him and throws him to the ground. Meanwhile, green algae was already approaching Kazuro's body. There was no way out. It was necessary to apply one technique to win. Opening his red voice, Kazuro looked at Fen, introducing him into an illusion and deflecting all attacks from himself. Fen looked into his eyes and sank deeper into everything. Sweat appeared on his face. Fear began to consume him. Fen seized the seaweed, grabbed Kojuro, and began to envelop his body. There was no way out of such a trap, and he was confident of victory. A slight smile appeared on his face. The guy had no chance. Enveloping his legs and almost his entire body, Fen looked with pride that he had won. He said that no one who falls into their trap can be saved from algae. Fen owns 3 of the highest monsters, and some guy couldn't resist him. It was in vain that he agreed to the fight. Now he is humiliated and defeated by the most gifted student of the University of the Supreme Devourers, named after Mao Qi. Kojuro looked at him with a calm gaze, enjoying the confidence of Fen, who is unaware of anything. Such a narcissistic upstart was bewitched and did not realize it. Having removed the illusion spell from Fen, he was very scared. Fen's body was shrouded in seaweed, and he lay on the ground while Kojuro stood over him proudly with his hands in his pockets. The shock of surprise was strong on Fen's face. For a long time he did not understand what was happening, beginning to realize that at the moment when Kojuro grabbed him, he was looking at him with a red eye. Apparently this was the moment Fen plunged into illusion. Realizing his failure, Fen was very angry and agitated. Kojuro looked at him with a smile, telling him how Fen looked foolishly believing that he had won while tied up, and he reminded him that he owed him a box of stones. The chairman of the school's board was extremely surprised by Kojuro's victory. Everyone around was happy about such a show. Especially Hanami was pleased that the winner was Kojuro. Due to such noise, even television came to film the battle for a new news release. Kojuro stood in the arena surrounded by many people cheerfully shouting and supporting him. They haven't had a show like this for a long time. Kazuro's calm face spoke of his steadfastness and desire to quickly get the prize and go home. Hanami began to tell the man that he was wrong, and was in vain to reason so superficially, not knowing the full power of the guys. The chairman felt that he was wrong. This was the first time for him. He began to wonder if Kojuro really was a gem like none of them had ever seen. While everyone was rejoicing, Suyuki's sister shouted to her brother to get ready, because he can win by using all his abilities, regardless of safety, in order to defeat this arrogant idiot. Fen heard her, and decided to try it in order to preserve the honor of the invincible family. Tensing her entire body, Fen begins to glow with the blue light of mana and exude incredible energy. The algae that were holding it together begin to burst and fall. He started shouting that the fight was not over yet, and was drawing Kazuro's attention to himself. Having summoned his monster from the mud, he casts a powerful spell, delighting everyone. The monster begins to inflate and scream loudly. A blue aura flies around him. Having inflated itself to the limit of its strength, the mud monster bulges, scattering its dirt across the arena. Kazuro is confused about what is happening and tries to dodge. Having covered the arena with a layer of his dirt, Kajuro began to suspect something was wrong. The blue aura flying over the arena haunted him. He tried to understand what Fen was up to and what his next step would be. Suddenly, Kazuro feels severe pain in his arm and is overcome with fear. He can't understand what's happening. It felt like he was standing in dirty water, out of the huge puddle in which Kazuro was located, and tries to grab the guy. He tries to run away, realizing that the monster can pull him underwater, but it was impossible to escape. The water was viscous, and it was difficult to move in it. The monster grabbed Kajuro and, wrapping his arms around him, tried to pull the guy under the water. Attempts to get out of the viscous substance were even. The monster grabbed onto Kazuro and did not let go. Tensing his body, he tried to fight the pestering monster and throw it off him. While trying to get out of the monster's clutches, Kazuro's gaze falls to the other end of the arena, where, on Fen's orders, the electric monster is preparing to strike with a lightning bolt. Knowing that he has little strength, he resorts to a desperate step and calls for a busty beauty. Hoping that there is enough mana, he wants to use an attack on Fen and incapacitate him. There was enough mana to summon a busty beauty. Starting to cast a magic spell on your zither, playing a certain melody, captivating those around you with the beauty and sound. Surprised that the guy still had the power to summon monsters, Fen was scared. He didn't know what the busty beauty was capable of. His gaze was frightened, and cold sweat ran down his face. A strong blow from a magical attack was aimed at Fen's feelings and consciousness. The body was very tense and could not move. He started screaming in pain. Being motionless, he was an easy prey, and Kajuro ordered the monster with a chainsaw to attack Fen. A running mountain with a hungry look and a screaming chainsaw greedily devoured the guy with its gaze and wanted to cut him into small pieces. The mud monster, which managed to help its owner, tried to cover him with its body. Chainsaw, jumping up to intensify the attack, attacked him with all his might. From the damage received, the power of the chainsaw only increased, and now cutting the monster from the mud was not a problem. Fen's look of surprise that his strongest defense monster had been defeated was great, and standing under the spell, he could hardly move. The spell was slowly fading away. Kicking off the stricken monster, the chainsaw finally rushed to taste Fen's flesh and kill him. Horror rolled over his face. Cold sweat flowed from fear. The thought of an imminent loss from a schoolboy was humiliating. But an attack from such a monster could kill. This had to be avoided. The gaze of the bloodthirsty monster was moving closer and closer with great speed and power. The desire to kill was visible on his face. The terrible roar of the monster and the sound of a sharp chain spinning on a saw instilled fear only more with each approach. Fen saw the determination in Kazuro's eyes, and he began to think that it was in vain that he got involved in this squabble between his sister and this rogue. The fear that the plan was beginning to collapse forced Fen to act without caution and change the battle strategy. Trying to drown out the roar of the surrounding spectators, Fen began shouting in fear to the electric monster to attack the monster with the chainsaw as quickly as possible. At the moment the monster swings with a chainsaw, the electric monster hits him with a strong electric shock. Fen stood in fear that he would not have time to save Fen and thought that this was the end. Struck in the back by lightning, the monster with the chainsaw began to scream in pain. His legs began to give way, and he could barely stand. Leaning against the running chainsaw, the monster could barely hold on. Having received such a strong blow, he should have died, but the saw's passive abilities were much stronger. The smoking wound on his back and heavy breathing greatly weakened the monster, but he did not give up. Fen had already completely freed himself from the power of the busty monster's magic, and watched as the monster with the chainsaw was amazed. Now nothing threatened his plan, and the confidence in his gaze returned again. Kazuro, aware of the passive skills of his monster with a chainsaw, begins to shout at him to use them and finally deal with Fen. The chainsaw's passive skill doubles strength and speed with a low health margin. The monster now begins to use its most dangerous attack while screaming at the top of its lungs. Spinning his chainsaw at great speed, Fen begins to move away and is angry that he is not succeeding. Such enormous speed cannot be easily dodged, and barely having time to lower his head, Fen manages to delay the time of death. Having fallen to the ground, he tried to crawl to the side to avoid being attacked. The incredible power of the monster with the chainsaw forced him to retreat. Looking around, Fen sees how a bloodthirsty monster waving his chainsaw begins to approach him. Fen, lying on the ground, was frightened and was already aware of failure and death approaching again. The electric monster, who made it in time at the last moment, covers Fen with its body and thereby sacrifices itself, saving its owner. Seeing how the electric monster saved him, Fen begins to try to gather his strength and get up. Seeing how ruthlessly the monster with the chainsaw dealt with his monster, there were very few options for victory. Unexpectedly for Fen, he receives a glancing blow to the face with a saw, and with cries of pain he falls to his knees. Lowering his eyes to the floor, he sees drops of blood flowing from his face and a severed ear. Being in a state of shock, he tries to collect himself. Finally, the enormous speed and strength of the monster with the chainsaw ended, and he was exhausted now, holding the bleeding wound. Fen rises. The anger and hatred on your face prevents you from thinking normally. The desire to defeat and kill Kajuro was too great. Having lost two of his loyal monsters, who fought to the end to protect their master, Fen understood that he only had one left, but he was still holding Kazuro, preventing him from entering the battle. Fen summons his swamp monster to himself, thereby freeing Kazuro. Now, after being freed and having accumulated a little mana and strength, Kajuro rises. Rising from the water, stretching his neck and clenching his fists, Kazuro prepares to finish off Fen and take his stones as a reward. The crowd jubilantly shouts words of support to the boy. The head of the absorbers looks admiringly at Kajuro and understands that the boy is no mistake, and he underestimated him in vain. Such talent should not be wasted. The crowd screamed in delight. Everyone was glad to be present and see the battle of the two absorbers with their own eyes. Hanami looked at Kajuro with a joyful look. It was no longer clear whether she wanted to kill him or make friends. Tsuyuki, who was standing next to them, looked at the beating of her brother very upset, and not at all good thoughts were ripening in her head. Tired and crippled, Fen stood with his surviving monster. In front of them lay a heavily wounded mud monster and an electric one. Their bodies needed restoration. On the contrary, Kajuro stood with his almost exhausted monsters. Assessing that the busty beauty still had the opportunity to deliver one blow, Kajuro began to wait for the moment of attack. Clenching his fists, he tried in every possible way to persuade Fen to give up and leave alive with at least one monster. Assessing his chances, Fen understood that they were few, but he did not want to give up. Looking at the confident Kazuro, a little afraid of what he might do, Fen stood waiting. Kazuro asks the buxom beauty to use a supersonic note and end the fight. As she began to cast the spell, she began to select a melody on her zither to strike. The approaching sound waves had a strong effect on the enemy, especially the seriously wounded, and could even kill them. Fen and his monsters began to cover their ears, trying to withstand such a blow. With all the remaining villages, Fen continues to stand and barely restrain himself so as not to scream in pain. Looking down at his lying, wounded monsters, he is horrified by what he sees. From the force of the supersonic impulse, they cannot stand it and begin to die, turning into dust. Fen is also at the limit and, in order not to die, absorbs the swamp monster back into himself. After the supersonic strike ended, Fen fell to his knees with a look of horror on his face. Tears rolled into my eyes. He looked at the ashes of his monsters, crying, remembering how long it took him to receive them and raise them to complete control. The highest-level monsters were destroyed by ordinary top-level monsters. From multiple wounds and overload, Fen's body can't stand it. Starting to feel unwell, he feels pain in his lungs and begins to cough up blood. Falling to the floor, unable to move, he admits defeat. Kajuro stood calmly looking at him with his hands in his pockets, while the crowd shouted his name and made noises of joy. As he began to descend the stairs after a very difficult and lengthy battle, he was greeted by a cheering crowd. Camera flashes and many lenses were pointed at him. He already understood that such an event would be shown on TV. Approaching a very aggressive Tsuyuki, he asked to give him the box with stones, because he had won. People behind took selfies in front of our hero and rejoiced in every possible way. She looked at Kajuro with contempt, but tightly squeezing the box, she still gave it to him. Leaving with the box, Kazuro smiled and said that it was a pleasure to deal with them, thereby causing a storm of anger from Tsuyuki. She was greatly irritated by such an arrogant command. No one has ever treated her like Kazuro. The head of the board of absorbers, passing by the arena, looked at Fen, who was lying unconscious. The thought that some high school student could defeat a more experienced senior student from the most prestigious university was incredible. And such talent being banned from entering universities was very strange. Kazuro's victory, Hanami decided to approach the man who believed that Kazuro had no chance and say that without assessing all the skills and abilities, it is impossible to predict the winner. Accepting his defeat in the conclusions, the chairman decided to give a large green stone to the girl for a valuable lesson, and opening his eyes, show real talent. Hanami was very pleased with this gift. She didn't even have to kill or steal anyone to get the valuable stone. The man stood and looked at the happy leaving girl and smiled a little himself. Walking through the market after a gorgeous spectacle and a stone earned for free, she accidentally overheard a conversation between Fen's sister and some guys. Hearing that they were planning to attack Kajuro, she was a little shocked. Realizing that after such a battle the guy had no strength left to fight, he was in danger. Turning around, she saw that the mercenaries were already leaving in the direction where Kazuro had gone. There was anger in her eyes, but she doubted for a long time whether to help Kajuro. He harmed her comrade and lost his leg. She wanted revenge herself. Meanwhile, after the fight, Kajuro decided to go shopping and buy food. He had very little strength and needed to replenish his energy reserves. The monsters following him were very exhausted and also wanted to rest. Seeing the meat in the bag, the monster with the chainsaw was licking his lips about how he could devour such a tasty treat. Kazuro stopped him, saying that they would only eat at home and there would be enough food for everyone. Having decided to give gifts to the others in honor of such a victory, he took out from the package something that would be very suitable for a busty beauty. Embarrassed, she folded her hands, hinting that it was not her size. Red Eye also wanted a gift, and acted like a child waiting for something special. His voice shone with curiosity, and his mouth showed a desire to smile with happiness. Deciding to troll the red voice a little, Kazuro hints that he will get a bag in which it will be convenient to carry him. The red voice was very angry at such a joke, thinking that the little asshole did not appreciate such a strong monster at all. Kazuro looked at the red eye, realizing that it was in vain that he decided to joke, and began to try to calm him down. Showing his stupidity and lack of respect for Red Eye, Kazuro began to apologize and give him any gift he chose. Having folded his tentacles into a lock, he looked at the guy not particularly trustingly, but agreed. Kazuro didn't want to quarrel with him, because he is the only one of the three with whom he communicates normally. The others still don't trust Kazuro much. Turning into an alley to shorten the way home and quickly have dinner, Kazuro pays attention to the silence and the absence of people around, but does not give it any importance. Red Eye begins to feel that someone is following them, to which Kazuro agrees with him, because he also felt it. Red Eye notices that they are too weak and will not be able to fight. They need to get out of here quickly. Kazuro, understanding this, also agrees, but he has not yet figured out how to do this. A sudden attack from some purple goo catches Red Eye and Kazuro by surprise. Having managed to dodge and jump away from the attack, Kajuro rolls to the side. Raising his head, he pays attention to the purple slime, which begins to hiss and melt the asphalt. This was a very dangerous attack, which means the enemy intends to kill them. A guy appeared in the alley with a cigarette in his mouth, looking at Kazuro with a smile. Behind him stood a purple monster, which attacked the guy with the red eye. Hearing other voices, Kazuro raised his head and saw another guy in glasses with a bat-like monster on his back. Kajuro, standing behind with his monsters, was tense. He understood that it was too dangerous to engage in battle now. Another guy appeared behind. Kajuro understood that they were surrounded. Now they couldn't leave so easily. Neda urgently needed to think about something. He looked at his monsters. They were exhausted and weak. Cold sweat ran down his face. While the surrounding bandits did not attack, Kajuro had a chance to think and find an answer on how to escape. The red eye was completely dry and needed drops, and the busty monster was weak. Her mana level was depleted. She needed at least 2 days to rest. They themselves agreed that they could not fight and would rather give up. For the first time, Kajuro saw their upset faces not causing fear among others. Only the insatiable monster with a chainsaw burned with a passion for battle, and despite his exhaustion, he was eager to fight. Kazuro knew that zeal alone was not enough, and he would simply lose the saw. While Kajuro was reasoning, a monster bat was already flying above them, looking around. A guy with a large bag stood behind, blocking the path. His monster was not yet visible. Reluctantly, Kazuro realized that they had no choice but to surrender to their opponents. Caught by surprise, completely exhausted by strength. If the situation had been different, there would have been a fight. Not knowing what to expect from the attackers, Kajuro was still ready and waiting. Aggressively minded bandits stood, preparing to attack. Their leader held a lit cigarette and looked at Kazuro, noticing that behind him the enemy was also at the ready. Kazuro did not know what to do. He was in a hopeless situation, turning into a dark alley so that a shortcut was not the best decision. Kazuro, with a contemptuous look, the bandit having finished smoking his cigarette, throws it towards the boy, deciding how best to attack and kill him quickly. Kazuro comes up with a very stupid but funny idea to pretend that he can pay off in kind and make a loving face, hoping that this would scare them off and they would let their guard down so he could escape. The bandits were offended by such a brazen act, and with strong antics of disgust, showed that they were not interested in this. Unfortunately for Kajuro, they weren't distracted, and it didn't work. Having finally gotten rid of the mercenaries, they decided to attack in order to teach the asshole a lesson. The guy with glasses was already ready to personally deal with the guy, but the chief stopped him, holding his stomach while holding back his gag instinct. Having given the command to his purple monster to attack, the leader of the mercenaries was already ready to have a good time for the rest of the evening in some pub with the girls for a reward from the death of Kajuro. Seeing the monster rushing towards him, Kazuro thinks to take a risk and release the monster with a chainsaw. He did not plan to give himself up to death so easily. The evil look was determined not to give the enemy a chance for an easy victory. Suddenly, someone intervenes in their mess by throwing tear gas grenades from a height. Having fallen to the ground, they exploded and enveloped everything in thick gas. It was impossible to breathe. My eyes were watering and I wanted to run away. The bandits were at a loss and did not control after the explosion where Kazuro was. But the boy was not at a loss, taking out from the bag a bra that he had bought for the busty monster, pulling it over his face. Unexpectedly for him, there is a rope in front of him, hinting that he should climb along it. Starting to rise from the thick fog, he looks at the bandits so that they do not pursue him. While they were at a loss, Kajuro did not lose the opportunity and rose higher and higher. Suddenly the rope began to rise on its own at high speed. Rising above the cloud of tear gas, Kajuro took off his bra from his face and breathed in fresh air. Raising his head, he leads in front of him the same clown who kidnapped him then. She smiled and tried to help Kajuro by extending her hand. Opening his eyes, standing among the dissipating cloud of gas, the leader of the mercenaries notices that the target is running away from them through the air and orders his minions to catch up with them. Having come to their senses, the bat with its owner on its back rushed in pursuit of Kazuro. Rising through the cloud of gas and weaving between buildings, they approached their target. The bat was a very fast monster in the air, and the guy with the glasses had no doubt that he would catch them. It was already a matter of revenge to finish off Kazuro. Seeing that they were approaching, the clown was absolutely calm, and putting her hand into the inner pocket of her jacket, tried to find something there. Having found pepper spray in my pocket, it was clear that this method would stop the enemy for a long time. The only important thing was to hit it. Having walked right into a monster with a guy in glasses, they at first did not understand what was happening. They were focused on the goal and did not notice such a dirty trick. Feeling an eerie burning in their eyes and breathing, they realized what had happened. The intense burning sensation made it impossible to continue the chase. Losing balance and suffering from pain, the monster and its owner fell back to the ground and disappeared in a cloud of gas. Only a smoking silhouette was visible, and screams of pain were heard. Having dealt with their pursuers, they sat on the monster and flew to a safe place. It was light outside and a beautiful starry sky. Flying through the sky, Kazuro was a little scared, and he grabbed Clown Girl by the waist. She was a little confused and asked to remove her hands. She was a little embarrassed because no one touched her. Embarrassed, Kazuro had also never been so close to a girl, not taking into account the busty monster beauty. Kazuro stupidly blurted out that the Clown Girl saved him since he probably interested her. The girl was embarrassed and showed her disinterest. Having invited Kajuro to her hideout, she wanted to talk to him. Why was he fighting with the son of the head of the Mao Chi Supreme Devourer School, Feng? Looking gray at the table, the clown girl introduced herself to Kazuro with the name Hanami. She was the leader of a group of mercenaries who are fighting against rich and dishonest families who stole and deprived ordinary people of a normal life. Kazuro was pleased to meet her, and experiencing some strange feeling, he was pleased to spend time with her. But realizing what he did to her colleague, he was a little ashamed and wanted to apologize. Hanami said that everything was fine, but he wouldn't get away with it so easily with an apology. She wanted to quickly return to the issue of the duel with Fen. Sitting down next to Hanami, Kazuro began to say that the fight happened because of Tsuyuki, Fen's sister. Hanami, surprised that the fight was caused because of a girl, raised strange questions. Hanami jumped off the table, thinking that Kazuro was Fen's sister's boyfriend, and seemed to have offended Tsuyuki, who decided to teach Kazuro a lesson by challenging him to a duel. She looked at Kazuro, thinking that it was a waste of time to bring him here, and that he was clearly somehow connected with the Lin family. If he told the police where she was, she would be caught and punished. Kazuro assured her that he had no good feelings for Fen and Tsuyuki's family. They wanted to kill him, and influenced his ability to enter a prestigious university. Such bad people should be punished and stop influencing the destinies of other people. Hanami, recalling her childhood, said that her family also suffered at the hands of a similar family. The man who came to their family with his mother was the head of the absorbers department. He was a normal man, and my mother liked him, but after a while he showed his true nature. Once upon a time, Hanami had a strong monster that defeated everyone existing at that time. The man who came wanted to kidnap the monster and take it for himself. He showed his essence. He was not interested in his mother. He just wanted to kill them, taking the monster for himself. At that time, he had a daughter to whom he could give the monster. Then, Kajuro remembered the girl from TV, defeating all opponents. He noticed that Hanami was similar to her. This was the work of that monster who was kidnapped by the man. It copied the owner's appearance and made the owner look like a doll. Kajuro listened to Hanami's story and sympathized with her. He thought about how to help her, Timolol, when they had so much in common. Kajuro told Hanami that his parents also left the city. They wanted to move to the countryside and start their own business there, and thought that Kajuro wouldn't understand anything. But they were wrong. Kazuro became angry. He said that he wanted to deal with these scoundrels and did not want them to harm anyone else. Hanami looked at Kajuro. There were tears in her eyes from the memories, but he gave her hope for a bright future. This made her a little embarrassed, and she was pleased to hear such words. Realizing that words alone are not enough, and such people have many strong absorbers under their command, there is very little chance of winning. And she laughed a little. This made Kajuro feel a little uneasy. Kajuro said that he is very selenium, and they cannot defeat him. He is sure that Fen lost to him because he did not know his abilities, and his arrogance ruined him. Hanami looked at him embarrassed. She didn't want to offend him, and was simply encouraging his self-confidence. Kajuro unconsciously lifted her spirits, even though he looked stupid. Unable to resist, she laughed and agreed to defeat these criminals together. Kajuro gave him a thumbs up, realizing that he now had a strong ally and a new friend. Noticing that her jacket was torn and she looked like a beggar, he wanted to help her. Torn sneakers lay on the ground. They looked like they had been running in them for years without taking them off. Kazuro understood that she didn't have enough money, and that she was obviously spending all her money on something else. Kazuro's offer of financial assistance, she became embarrassed, and said that she did not need anything. She spent her money on her mother's treatment after the attack by that man. She doesn't need anything from ordinary people. He handed her a bag of groceries as a thank you, but Hanami refused and didn't want to take it. Kajuro pressed with his proposal and did not accept refusal. Unable to hold the package, it began to fall and the contents began to appear from the inside. The guys looked at the falling package and watched in embarrassment as it fell. Hanami looked at the contents of the package with surprise. Kajuro watched as the pink fabric with suspenders lay on the ground. He felt awkward and was afraid of the girl's reaction. A large bra lay on top of green stones and a box. A beautiful flower connected the two cups, and the lace around it was very seductive. Hanami thought he was a pervert, and was very embarrassed. Kazuro understood that the worst had already happened. He began to think about how to justify himself. He decided to tell the truth, and that this was a gift to his busty monster in order to raise the level of trust. Hanami, with her hands clasped, didn't quite trust the words, but it was quite reasonable. Stretching out his hand with the box, Kazuro invited her to take the stones won for defeating Fen and sell it. She would make very good money, and her mother would not need anything. Hanami refused, saying that she herself was able to earn money for treatment and that she did not need his handouts. Kazuro said that this was a sign of reconciliation, and she saved his life. This is a worthy reward for such a thing. Pulling herself together, she agrees and offers her strength to help in the battle with people like Fen. After bumping their fists as a sign of reconciliation and friendship, they decided to go their separate ways and go about their business until their next meeting.